Welcome back, everybody, to DissedMedia, a startup story, the podcast where we take you behind the scenes of starting a business from the ground up. And today we're going to get into legal waters. It's one of those things that I think, we all have to eventually, as business owners, as entrepreneurs and managers, we need to understand the legal side of things for a number of reasons. Anything from starting the corporation to when we have employee issues, when we have customer issues, how do we protect ourselves? How do we make sure that we avoid some of the pitfalls that could get us into situations what are going to kind of take our time and take our focus away from the things that we love doing? And so today, have joining me Bobby Klinck. Bobby, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here. And to the audience, I promise we won't make this boring because talking about legal stuff, obviously you might hear that and want to run, but we'll keep it entertaining. And so it's not dry and boring like most legal stuff.
It won't be like a terms of service agreement. Bobby, I was reading up a little bit about you and your background. And before we get started, I always like to kind of dive into that a little bit and just kind of set the stage for your experience and your wisdom that you kind of bring to the table here. Harvard University graduate, more than 20 years of experience in law.
Yep.
Following graduation and getting into the work that you do, where did you start? How did you carve this path into what we're going to get into a little bit later on, which is your book and all kinds of things that you do?
So I like to say that the first 8 years of my legal career was, in a sense, the path that many lawyers would just love to go down. I got a job after graduating from law school, working for a federal appellate court judge for a year. It's one of the prestigious positions you can get. And he was a judge who President Clinton twice considered appointed to the Supreme Court. So he was one of these top tier in the Court of Appeals. And I got to spend a year learning from him and doing that. Then I went to private law firms in Washington, D.C., the type of places that represent Fortune 100 companies. And I did that work, represented Bayer at one point, represented a bunch of different things, got a chance to represent state attorneys general before the Supreme Court multiple times and did those things. The problem with those types of firms, though, is, as you can imagine, the cases that they have tend to be very big cases. And if you're a company and you have a case where, I don't know, $100 million is at stake, guess what you generally don't let happen? You don't let someone who hasn't ever stood up in court stand up in court on your behalf. So it's one of kind of the catch-22s of those big firms. So after spending about 4 or 5 years doing that, I went and got a job as a federal prosecutor in Fort Worth. And that was I was thrown in by fire, stand up on a regular basis. There was rarely a week that I didn't have to stand up in court and make an argument of some sort or another, got to try cases, got to do all of that stuff, got my experience. And that's one of these things that people at these white shoe law firms often do to get experience. It's a great way to get your feet dirty. I got to go and argue multiple cases before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in Louisiana. And it was a wonderful experience, but I knew that wasn't what I wanted to do long term. So in 2010, I was deciding to come back to the Washington, D.C. area. And I had an offer to go back to the prestigious firm where I had been, which, by the way, I forgot to mention, after first working for a liberal Court of Appeals judge, my first mentor at that firm was a guy who I called Neil at the time. Now I'd have to call him Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. So I've had legal lions on both sides of the aisle as people who mentored me at points in my career. And I had the opportunity to go back there. And I almost did, but I said, let me look around. I swear, I don't even know how I found this firm, but there was this small little firm, 2 guys, and they had started about a year or so earlier. And I just said, that sounds like fun, going and being entrepreneurial. And part of it is my dad was a business owner. So I grew up seeing someone and understanding the perspective of building a business and owning a business and being in charge. And so that's what I wanted to do. So I joined this little law firm as a partner. I like to say I was a partner in name only. I didn't have any equity in the firm, but they treated me fairly for the first well, for the entire time I was there.
Thought we were going to change directions there.
No, they treated me fairly, but the problem was I made one of those classic mistakes that business owners, that entrepreneurs make. We didn't have a written agreement about like, how was I ultimately going to become a partner in the firm, which look, at big law firms, that's not a big deal because you're making money. There's this set path, you do well and it works. Well, this firm did a lot of work on contingency. So there were periods I would go 6 months without getting a paycheck. Now, then we would have a big thing come in and I was treated fairly, almost make it a third of the money. But I had all the downside risk. And the problem was I had no guaranteed upside because if we'd hit some big, huge case, they could have just decided, you know what? We'll give him a little bit, we'll take it, and we'll just retire. They could have done that at any moment. And so my wife gets pregnant in 2013. And I said, we need to talk about this. And we tried to talk it through. And the problem I tell people is if you don't work these things out, like a partnership or something like that at the beginning, it is almost impossible to work it out later. And so we tried to work it out and then it didn't. And I remember that it came to a head a Sunday night. We had a kind of a just conference call and I was sitting in my basement. It was snowy outside, but we had this discussion and it didn't go well, to the point that literally if we'd been in the same room, I probably would have thrown a coffee mug at one of the guys because of the things he was saying. And I got off the phone. I looked over at my wife and my brother-in-law happened to be at the house that time. I said, we need to go to the office. And I took all my stuff back and I grabbed all my stuff from the office. And that was it. And I decided I was going out on my own and going to hang my shingle and start my own law firm. And that was in 2014. And since then, I've been building businesses in various ways. First a law firm, then an online business. Now it's turned into a software company. And so that's been my journey since then. And it's gone through a lot of different ups and downs. And I've learned a lot of lessons along the way, that's for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It feels like, correct me if I'm wrong, and I certainly may be, you probably had this knowledge that you brought a particular level of quality, skill, and expertise to the role. And they probably saw it differently and said, yeah, I mean, you're good, but.
Well, and it wasn't even that. And this is why it's funny, because the problem was that to some extent, I had, like when I was at this firm, they did a lot of different types of law that I didn't really have any experience with before, but they didn't either. They were antitrust lawyers, was really their experience in the past. And they then had gotten, I don't even know how they met this guy, but had met this other attorney who had some patent stuff, some patent litigation stuff, and they were starting to dabble in that, but they didn't have any expertise in that. So soon after I joined, one of those cases really came to life. And then there was another they had a big class action lawsuit on an antitrust issue. I didn't know anything about that. So they said, why don't you just handle this patent thing? I knew nothing about patents, patent litigation. I knew absolutely zero about it, but I said, sure. And so I built that knowledge up, and I was the one who was then in charge of that kind of practice that we had that had a decent amount. It wasn't all of our business. It wasn't even, I don't even know what percentage, but I was doing that. And in that case, strangely, it was me and this other attorney who was outside who had brought in the stuff would kind of advise me on stuff, but it's basically me against one of the 5 biggest law firms in the country. And we were suing the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And I like to say, I wiped the floor with them along the way. And so I knew I had value, but at the same time, what I'd say is, and this is the strange thing, if we had been talking at the outset when I was first joining the firm, the offer that they were making me 4 years later, I wouldn't have had a problem with. But as tends to happen, everyone's perspective changes over time. And that's why I like to say, look, whether things work or don't work, the best time to come to an agreement and to hash out all the details and all the important things is at the beginning, before it's working and before it's not working, because either way it can end badly. And it really is just hard to negotiate because everybody's going to have a different perspective. And if you're negotiating later, like I was with them, it really is a zero-sum game at that point. Like every percentage point I get is a percentage that they don't get. And so I could definitely understand it. And again, I can't even remember all the details about the way it worked. But I think part of the problem was, in some sense, it was going to make me worse off even over the short term. So it was going to be like, hey, if we hit grand slams, fine. I would have been great, no problem. But if we kept hitting base hits and doubles, all of a sudden I was going to be making considerably less than I had been making to that point at the firm. And it was kind of like, whoa, wait, this is not it really wasn't working out for me. And so it did it. But I also like to tell people a big part of the problem, like of the two guys, one of the guys was fine and he would have given me a lot more, but the other guy was the sticking point. I haven't talked to that guy since 2014. And the strange thing is that guy flew through Hurricane Sandy in a 10-person plane to get to my wedding, like 2 years before.
Wow.
And I haven't talked to him since. And it gives you a sense of when you make these kinds of mistakes and these legal mistakes, yeah, the business stuff can be painful, but oftentimes it will also have personal impacts and have those scars that can really hurt you in a personal way that you don't think about. And so I just tell people, don't do what I did. Don't make that mistake. Get those agreements, get all those things hashed out at the beginning so that you know it's taken care of. And it's funny, in the tech world, in the startup world, I see it all the time where people do these things and there is no agreement. They haven't even really talked about it. They just start working and building something. And I see that, I'm like, oh God, no, please, this is going to end badly.
A couple things as you say that. One, as a little bit of an aside, it's interesting. There's this perspective that circulates in the business world that, well, it's just business, right? But the reality is that, we form bonds, we form friendships and partnerships. And it's a bit hurtful at times when you have to take that stance, when the relationship dissolves. I mean, I've been through that myself on a couple of occasions and it does suck, but it's hard. It's hard to reconcile that, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. And saying it's just business is, look, if it's like an arm's length transaction, some company that you're doing business with or some person you're doing business with.
You're buying a car.
Yeah, that's one thing. But I'm saying if it's someone you work with, let's be honest. Most of us are going to talk to the people we work with more than we're going to talk to just about anybody else. And maybe it's not talking, maybe it's slacking, but you get my point. Where those
you spend a lot of time with them.
Right. Those are the people that we often spend the most time with. Like sometimes even more than our significant others or spouses. And if not more than, about they're maybe second to our spouses. And so it really often is, business is personal, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, it is. The other thing I was thinking about as you were saying that is I've come across this in my own experience. Sometimes you'll get founders, people who work with each other, and like right away, they're like 50-50. Yeah. And I always tell people, like, you really got to think about that equity stake there, because even in a partnership, there are times when somebody just brings more to the game because of their background or their experience. And that, 50-50 isn't always the starting point in a partnership, in a duality. That, sometimes it makes sense to understand what your share is that you bring to the relationship.
Yep.
And in your case, it sounds like, you had a significant amount of business that you were bringing in with a level of expertise that clearly wasn't represented by other parts of the firm. So you did kind of have a niche carved out for yourself there. So disappointing that wasn't fully recognized.
Yeah. And I like to tell people, looking back, I don't have any ill feelings about it.
It's a learning lesson.
It's a lesson, but I also say, look, they weren't being bad. It's just, we all have our own perspective. Yeah. And we all, let's be clear, this is one of the things that I tell people about why it's important to get just agreements in writing. Our memories aren't as good as we like them to be. And what tends to happen is we tend to make ourselves more the hero in our story over time. And so I'm sure to them, they have a very different perspective, and it is perfectly valid. And that's why I just tell people, trying to negotiate these things after the fact becomes so dang hard. Whereas if you do it in advance, before you've built up all that, what tends to happen is, look, maybe you have a disagreement, but if you have a written agreement, you can then go look at the agreement and be like, oh, you're right. Sorry. And that's kind of the end of it, right? Versus this feeling of one person feeling like they're getting screwed over and they're just having to back down. And so you just want to avoid that as much as possible.
Well, and with those things, as we experience those what are seemingly setbacks at the time, blossom into new opportunities, which is kind of where you took things from that point. Considering that, as you got into starting your own firm, going out on your own, walk me through that a little bit. Like, how was that? What was the experience, and where did you find your niche as you moved out on your own?
So when I went out on my own, I don't want to say I made all the mistakes, but I made probably 90% of the mistakes that people make. And part of it was, this wasn't a big plan. I didn't have some big inspiration to do this. I had one client who went with me. It was actually not a patent litigation case. It was I'm trying to remember what it was. It was a dispute about employment and equity and things like that. Ironically, funny that's how it was. But I was representing the guy who was kind of the plaintiff making the claim about something, and he decided to come with me. So the good news was that was on a contingency and it settled relatively quickly, which put a nice chunk of change in my pocket and gave me some breathing room. I also happened to, I don't even know how it happened. I reached out to some people I knew, and one of them, he had a firm down in Texas. I had thought about joining his firm at some point. He had called me when I was a prosecutor because I'd interviewed with him before. I'm originally from Texas, by the way, but so he had interviewed me, and I don't know if I just kind of reached out, but strangely, his firm had a legal malpractice case going on that involved patent litigation. They didn't have anybody who knew patent litigation. And so when I reached out to him, he brought me on as kind of counsel to this firm to help them with this case. And I just got a monthly kind of guaranteed payment each month, which was nice. I had these things floating me, but other than that, I didn't have much going on. And so at first, one of the big mistakes is I was saying I would do anything for anybody. And I don't mean that literally, but my website, you couldn't tell what I did because I said I would write briefs for you. I would do this. And it was just all over the place because I was afraid, because I was coming from a place of scarcity and I need to get something here and I need to catch any case that could potentially help.
I mean, you had the kid.
But I mean, I was literally just trying to say, I've got to find anything that'll work and anything, any kind of work that'll do. But as tends to happen when you do that, you don't get much. I had a couple of little things come in, but they were small. Meanwhile, I was saying, okay, I got to figure out how to market because that's something that they don't teach you in law school. Big firms definitely don't teach you that. Working for the government, I had not had to do that. And even at that small firm that I joined, it had come in. There was this source of work from this guy who was bringing these patent cases that had slowed down. Mind you, I'm still working with that guy now in some other stuff. That relationship has continued. But at the time, he didn't have a lot of work to bring my way. I had to figure out marketing. So the first thing I did, I said, you know what? Let me go buy these books about marketing for lawyers. Threw those out quick because they're really bad. Marketing, lawyers think of marketing as I'm going to talk to other lawyers. I'm going to write a blog post for other lawyers. I'm going to write a newsletter for other lawyers, and I'm going to go network with other lawyers. That works great if you're representing big companies because then lawyers are the people in big companies who are doing the hiring. But otherwise, wait, I'm not even talking to my potential clients here. This doesn't make a lot of sense. So I threw that out and went searching for more general marketing knowledge. And that's when I fell down the rabbit hole of online marketing. And I don't know how I found it, but I found HubSpot, which at the time was, I don't know that it was at the beginning of them talking about inbound marketing, but it was when inbound marketing, the idea of inbound marketing was hot. I got myself certified in inbound marketing by taking a bunch of courses there because I was like, what the heck else am I going to do? And I started doing it. And I started coming up with things, focusing in and saying, look, I do patent litigation. And I think I described a couple other narrow niches that I handled. And in patent litigation, then I started saying, you know what? I'm going to create like a little pamphlet that I can give to people. That pamphlet turned into an actual book, an Amazon published book called Patent Litigation Primer. And it was a bestseller on Amazon. Now, before anyone gets excited about that, in that niche, being a bestseller probably required me to sell 3 copies of my book on launch day. And that was about it because not a lot of people are buying books there, but it became this thing that people would buy and people would see it. And then as a result, they would trust me and call me about potentially representing them in patent case. But also, if someone reached out to me and hadn't heard of the book, I could give it to them. And it was this sense of, oh, this guy must know what he's talking about because he's written a whole book on the subject. And so I was doing those things and I was building that business. The problem was I had this realization that while I love the law, building a legal practice was not something I really wanted to do. And especially building the kind of legal practice I was doing, because I was doing litigation where I was in court fighting with people. And I would have to fight with people about some of the stupidest things ever. Like literally one time I had to fly down to West Palm Beach. Florida twice because it was in this case. And the other side, it was an accounting malpractice case. And the other side had given us their accounting work papers, which basically means all the accounting stuff where they've done all these things. And this is back in the day when everybody's doing handwritten notes, et cetera. And Some of the stuff they had given me were copies of copies. And at some point along the way, the copies had gotten illegible, unreadable because a paper had moved while it was being copied or something. And I said, hey, I need you guys to give me legible copies. And they refused. And so I literally had to fly down to Florida twice. First, because the judge required us to do what's called a mediation, go talk to somebody. They didn't agree. Then I had to fly down again for a hearing. We go to the hearing, and the judge looks over at the other side and said, seriously? Give him the damn papers. And I was like, okay, but why am I having to do this, right? Why is this my life that I'm having to do those things? And then at the same time, my daughter's getting older, and I had it was this weird period where in this very limited time, I had to miss her graduation from pre-K or from whatever, before kindergarten, because I had to fly out somewhere at the last minute because the opposing side was being annoying about something. And then at the end of the summer, it was looking like I was going to have to miss her first day of kindergarten, which I was looking forward to the concept of walking my daughter to her first day of kindergarten at her neighborhood school. That was something that I really wanted to do. And I was like, this just isn't worth it. It's not worth living a life like this that I don't get to live my life. And I was working with a life coach at the time who, at first it was talking about relationships and life and all that other stuff. And after we'd probably been working together about 6 months, and this is all, I don't remember when and all these other time frames, but it's in all in that critical period. She says, okay, let's talk about your work. Do you like what you do for a living? And I stammered. And it was the first time I admitted to anyone other than maybe my wife that I really wasn't enjoying it. And I like to blame life coaches because they won't let you just wallow. But so she was like, okay, great. What are we going to do about it? And I was like, I don't know. And she said, and we brainstormed. She said, I could see you. And it's funny. She said, I could see you going to radio shows or going to podcasts and talking to people and talking to business people about the legal stuff. I said, that's interesting. So I thought about it and said, okay. And we wrapped up our call. We had another call 2 weeks later. By the time we had that call 2 weeks later, I had booked an agency to book me on podcasts, and we were already on the way of doing it. And this was, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. And it's funny, like looking back at that period, the images of me, it was the classic lawyer pose. I'm in a suit, turned sideways with my arms to the side, looking like this. That was like the headshot I was giving to people.
No joke. I think I have that picture up here on my monitor. Not the ones on your website. The ones on your website, by the way, I like the more grounded approach, we'll say.
Yeah, that was what I did because I didn't know any better. And the thing is, I had no idea about what a business was going to be. I was just like, okay, I'm gonna get into action. One thing that I'm very good at is I'm great at throwing spaghetti against the wall, seeing what sticks, trying things. And I like to tell people I'm willing to try stuff. And if it doesn't work, great. Because you know what? I can do really stupid stuff and people don't remember that. People only remember the stuff that works out. So I started doing that. And from that, it came the idea that I was going to create a business that would be about helping online businesses and smaller businesses and startups get their legal protection in place. And part of that was at my law firm, some of what had happened is I kept having clients and potential clients come to me after it had hit the fan, like after things had gone wrong. And it was at a point where they would come to me. I said, you could hire me, but quite honestly, we're going to have to spend a year, 18 months fighting this. It's going to cost you way more money to pay me, to pay all this other stuff than to just say, and chalk this up as a mistake you made and a lesson. And it was the kinds of things, many of them that could have been avoided with a tiny bit of work on the front, with just getting a written agreement in place in the beginning, or just dealing with something at the outset. And so my idea was, hey, maybe I can help people do that and do it in an affordable way. Because most of the people hadn't done it because it was expensive, right? Hiring lawyers, we're expensive. We cost a lot of money. And so they were And so they said, I can go without. And that had led to the problem. So I was like, what if I can make an affordable solution? And so it led to this idea. I was going to create something called Safeguard Your Online Genius, which was going to be a course with templates, all these things to help people. And I went all in on the concept. And in this year, so I'm trying to think what that year, that would have been 2017, where this was all happening. And between the podcast pitching agency, I hired a Facebook ads agency, my Facebook ad costs, the cost that I did for ClickFunnels for the actual software, but also for coaching on how to make it work and all these things and all of the other things. At the end of the day, I was into this about $50,000 or $60,000 before I had even really launched anything or tried to launch anything. And I was ready to go. I knew it was going to work out because I had this sense, hey, I'm good at this. I had a webinar using Russell Brunson's from ClickFunnels, his perfect webinar thing. I knew it. I practiced it the day before, recorded because someone had told me, hey, you need to be at an 11. Because if you're at a 10, if you're at a normal, it actually comes out flat on a webinar. So it's okay. So I recorded one. Like, yep, looks good. So next day I go on, I do the webinar, and then I ended it. And then I'm like, let me go in and see how many sales I made. 0. No sales. And then I think cart was open. I don't remember how long, but a couple of weeks, I made 1 sale. And that person asked for a refund on day 29 of a 30-day, no questions asked refund policy. And that was at the end of 2017. And I was like, what the hell have I gotten myself into?
Well, on the bright side, you did get a write-off, right? For the investment.
Yeah, there you go. But we can go with it on that. But so I had done this, and like at the time I transitioned, like my law firm, I had wound it down to no work. I wasn't bringing any money there because this is what I want to do. Again, one of those stupid mistakes, like bring the boat closer before, get the other business working before you stop the business that's working. And so I did that in early 2018. I was like, man, I don't know what to do. I said, I'm going to give myself one last shot. And I just looked at things differently in 2018. And I started approaching it not from a perspective of looking at it as transactions and all that, but really came back to my basic personality, which was how could I serve people and how could I help them and just be helpful? And so I started providing help for free, just engaging in free communities and paid communities that I was in, just being helpful, being a cheerleader. Sometimes it was about legal stuff, but sometimes, quite honestly, it was about marketing stuff that I had figured out because I had spent a lot of time on this stuff and I was starting to understand it. And so I was helping people. And then it just seemed to work. And part of it was I was in this community. I joined a paid course program through an affiliate, and this affiliate had brought in 1,000 people. And so those 1,000 people were all in a group on Facebook where I was just being crazy helpful, just engaging nobody's business. And it got me noticed. Like everybody in the community noticed me, but also the person, the affiliate who was now is a very big name, and her name's Amy Porterfield. She's like in the building course world. That's what she does. She teaches people to do that. And she had noticed me too. And this also happened to be 2018, where this little law called GDPR in the EU was going into effect, and everybody was freaking out because the law had been on the books for, 3 years, but nobody had thought about it until the month or two before it actually went into effect. And so it was like, what the hell do we have to do? And people kept asking me. I was like, I hadn't really looked at it. I was like, let me go find a good training that I can point people to. And I went to multiple trainings. I was like, I can't understand what they're saying. And I'm a lawyer. How is a business person or an entrepreneur going to understand this? So I went and I printed out the law, I read it, and I put together my own trainings. And unlike most lawyers who were treating that as an opportunity to make money, they were charging people $95 to come to a training. I was like, I'm going to create training and give it away for free. And so I did that. And then meanwhile, this woman, Amy Porterfield, the big affiliate person, reached out to me. She was creating her own course and was looking for a lawyer to create something, a bonus in it about the legal stuff. And she asked me if I would be willing to do it. Meanwhile, at this point, I've maybe made $2,000 or $3,000 online. And this woman who has a huge audience is asking me to do it. And I was like, so literally this happens. I run downstairs to tell my wife, and she's like, who, what, huh? She doesn't know. She has no idea. And then I run back up to my office. I'm like, be cool, Bobby, be cool. Don't act overeager. But so I respond something like, hey, yeah, I'd be happy to, but I don't know if you've heard, I don't know if I'm working on the training for X, Y, and Z about the GDPR, and we'll have to figure out a time that we can make this work. And I hit send, and I'm expecting, okay, it's going to be a while. Within 2 minutes, I get a reply back from her. Wait, great. Hold the phone. You're creating a GDPR training. How much is it? I'd pay for it. I said, no, it's free. And she was like, she was confused again. And so then she invites me to come onto her podcast. And at the time, she did not link out to anybody's freebies, but she did in that case to me because she felt what I was creating was so useful. And she had just seen me being helpful and serving in her community. So my list went from, 800 to 5,000 in a matter of a week. And by the way, I had separately planned to launch my next launch of what I was going to do, a reiterated, retooled thing of what I was going to do on May 2nd. My podcast episode with her went live April 30th. That was not planned. She didn't know my launch date. It just so happened to work. And so all of a sudden I went and I said, boom. And in May of that year, I made over $70,000 because I had basically, I felt like I had cracked the code, but I hadn't. I had just been doing it right finally. I was actually just looking at serving and saying, how can I help people? And if I help enough people, I trusted that the universe would take care of it, take care of me. And that's how I've built my business since then, is have that approach to things.
Wow, I love that story for so many reasons. There's a little bit of parallel to some of the things that I've been trying to do with DissedMedia, what we do with the daily pitch. The mission, the mantra of our website is help managers, leaders, and entrepreneurs get better at what they do.
Yep.
Purposely broad because there's a lot of things in business that people can get better at doing. But, that is really kind of the goal. And the first, I've been running this thing for 3 years now, and it, similar to you now, I've not put nearly the amount you did into it, but to me, it's a labor of love. I enjoy creating stuff, and most recently, shameless plug for myself, just finished first book here on topics to help people get better at what you do as well. Available at Amazon. But anyway, the point about that, though, and you reminded me of something that someone on my board when I formed this company, a gentleman by the name of Matt Sankum, he mentioned, and it sticks with me. I talk about it all the time. He said, Ben, audiences take time.
Yep.
And he's very right about that. The other thing, when I asked him, because he's one of these guys who's been in this media space and journalism space for a while, and I asked him about ads, and he said, grow your audience organically first, because there's going to be a lot of people out there who are going to be willing to take money to promote you, or you do ads. And the problem is that once that money dries up, those people go away, and it doesn't necessarily translate into revenue. And so I've really kind of focused on a model, even myself, of we give a lot of stuff away.
Yep.
And do that purposely, because ideally what we're trying to create first is a community. And then, like with the book, these are the helpful things that if you want to dive deeper into stuff, you spend a little bit of money, not huge amounts, but a little bit there. As you think about like how you moved into the work that you're doing now, because now you have really, you have a couple books, you have an app, I guess you would say, a SaaS app. This eventually kind of evolved into those things as well.
Yeah. And I like to say that I was forced to do certain things that are a bit different from a lot of people building online businesses, partly because what I sell is legal stuff, which no one really wants. Let's be honest. Once you've dealt with the legal stuff, you don't want to think about it. You don't want to deal with it. It's just, I want this problem solved and I want it out of my life. And the bigger problem is a great testimonial for someone who's bought my product is I bought Bobby's product and nothing happened. Think about that. That is the good result for people. Nothing happened. And so it's like, those are pretty compelling testimonials to get, but that's my life as selling what I sell. And so picking up where I left off the story. So I had this great May and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And then I'm trying to replicate it. But the problem was I couldn't. And I was doing a lot of the stuff that people said. I was like, you know what? I'm going to run weekly webinars. The problem with running weekly webinars is unless you're going to dump, I don't know, $10,000 a month into ads, you're not going to get enough people. So I was often doing these webinars for one person or two people. And that gets disheartening, at least for someone like me. Like when literally I'm doing something and I know one person is there, I couldn't get my energy up. So through the summer, I was making a little bit of money, but it wasn't great. And there was an event in August, I believe it was August or September of that year. It was Amy Porterfield. She was having an event for all those people in that group. And I looked at my wife and said, I don't even know if I want to go. And she looked at me and said, you're going. My wife was just like, you're going. And there was no question about it. I said, fine. And part of it was,
convince me this Amy lady is somebody important. You need to go.
Whatever. But so I'm sitting there thinking to myself, part of the problem is, although I don't seem like this, nobody believes it when they talk to me like this. I'm not an introvert. I am what's called a shy extrovert. So if I'm talking to people I know, I'm great, I'm that. But I go to a conference, I go to something like that, I'm the guy against the wall who's, I don't know how to go talk to somebody or introduce myself into a conversation. That's not who I am. So that was part of my worry too. Plus it's on the West Coast. I was like, whatever. But my wife says, you're going. So I go and I fly in and I go to the hotel. And as I'm checking in, people start coming up to me and talking to me because they knew who I was, because I had been so helpful and active in the community that everybody knew me.
That's
and
awesome.
And so it avoided this weirdness that I had to deal with. And so the first day, like I think there were like 200 people who were going to be at the event, and only 100 people, I think the first 100 or something, got to go to the first night. There was a limit. I guess it was just people who had put in their names early enough. And I was one of them. And by the way, I was actually working there with Amy and her team separately, helping them with legal stuff. So they had interacted with me. But so we go to this event and there was this big long line to take a picture, because this is the big thing. You go to one of these events, you want to take a picture with the person. So there's a big long line. Fine. I'm waiting with people I've met and interacted with, and we're chatting it up. We get to the front of the line, and the number 2, the woman who I had been dealing with the most about the legal stuff, was there. And so I wanted to take a picture with her. At the time, look, I'm an old guy. I'm not good at taking selfies. I don't know what to do. So I hand her the phone. We take a selfie. We chat a little bit. Then I go take my picture with Amy. We're chatting a bit. And then I get back to my room that night after, I don't want to say closing down the bar, but because again, once I know people, I'm good and was just having fun, having a great time with everybody. But I get back to my room. It's probably midnight on the West Coast. I live on the East Coast. I'm looking through my phone and I look at the selfie that I'd taken with the number 2. And behind her is Amy, this woman who is whatever. I've always known her as very, not formal, but don't not explain it, but isn't someone who does this. But she photobombed us like this, with her tongue out, just in the most ridiculous way possible. And I just started laughing. And I'm like, I got to tell somebody about this. And so I text a picture of my wife. Nothing about, it's 3 a.m. where she is. She's not going to see this. So I'm going to. So I go to sleep. I wake up the next morning to a text back from my wife. Why are you sending me pictures of you with random women? Because literally there was no context. It was just me taking a picture with one woman and another woman behind me. And she didn't know them. She knew these people by name, but had never seen their pictures. So they're, okay, we're getting off to a good start here. Then I tell one of these people who I had connected with in the community and who I'd met there, who's an Australian woman who liked to call me a Kiwi, which I think is an insult from an Australian, but I'm not exactly sure. But we like to have fun. And so I tell her this story and she's laughing. Then one of the presentations that day was about email marketing, about telling stories. And this woman who I'd told this story to, she looks over at me and she says, just gives me this look. And then after the presentation's over, she's like, you got to tell that story in an email. And I was like, maybe I should. And so after the event wraps up, I go back and I send an email to my list. And the subject line was, why are you sending me pictures of you with random women? And I tell the whole story of this thing. It was the highest open rate I'd ever gotten. My list, my community had always skewed female. About 70 to 80% of my community and list has always been female. I think it's because women are smarter and know they should get protection in place, whereas men are dumb a lot of times. But I'll leave that aside. But this was like one of the only times I'd ever had any men respond to my emails, because they were afraid that their emails had been hacked. And I was literally just sending this to them. But I got that, and I got an amazing response from people. And people were writing back. And so I said, maybe this telling stories is a way to go. And so that became my secondary. The thing I was known for, actually more than legal stuff for a while, was my emails. I built a cult following of copywriters even, who, these were people who did this for a living. And they said they saved a lot of my emails as swipe copy, as examples of how to do things. And it was everything from shock headlines. On one week, on Easter week, my subject line was, I don't like sweet baby Jesus. And it wasn't about the person. It was about a beer. There's a beer from near me that I call an abomination. It's let me get this straight, chocolate peanut butter imperial porter. And I said, I like chocolate, I like peanut butter, and I like beer, but don't combine them. And the hook of it was, businesses actually should be simple. The best businesses are simple. They're not complicated, just like the best beers are simple, not complicated. So don't do this to your business, was kind of the idea. And so I would do things like that. And then I would tell stories from my life from high school. And one time I said, I think I peaked in high school. And I told this story about this weird event I'd done at a debate tournament where my coach made me do this thing where I was supposed to be humorous. And I literally, I don't think of myself as funny, but I made the judge literally fall out of his seat laughing when I got to the third point in the speech I was giving because it was so contradictory. And so I just told these stories and I told that, and literally someone responded and said, I had to do that exact same event at one of these tournaments. And all of a sudden I became this person. I wasn't just a guy on the internet. To that person, I was the guy who had also done the same event as them. And so it personalized me to people in a way that normal email marketing didn't. And so I then for a while branched out. I was teaching email marketing as well as business building, marketing, all these things, as well as legal stuff. Wrote a book, Email Marketing That Doesn't Suck, that was an Amazon bestseller. And when you read the reviews, people will literally say, I was literally laughing out loud reading this book. And I was like, that's a good sign. I did it right.
Plus, it's a category where you need more than 3 people to to rank.
Yeah. And that one was, I think I got screenshots at the time because it was bestseller in categories where there were some big entrepreneurial books that were second and third. Now, those were ones that had been out for a while, and I did it right. I did a big launch team. I had a bunch of people providing reviews and buying on day one and all those things. It was a great experience. And the funny thing was, again, from a business perspective, the stupidest thing I'd ever done, because by the time I launched that book, I was no longer selling any products, or I didn't have any paid offers related to email marketing. But I was like, hey, it's something I had to say, and it's a good book, and it's something that can help people. And so I did it, and I don't regret it. I actually have it sitting here. I'll still look at it every once in a while, but that's some of the things I did. And then in 2023, I decided, you know what? I need to take my business, which the legal side of the business at that time, I was just selling legal templates. I was giving the training for free. Templates was what I sold. But in 2023, I decided that maybe a SaaS solution was what I needed to create. And part of this was I knew that my templates, they were okay. Not that the templates were bad, but templates are only part of the problem. They're only solving part of the problem people have. And I said, maybe I could create something that solves more of the problem. And this had been spurred on by, this was early days of ChatGPT. It had come out late 2022 for regular folks to look at. And so I was like, maybe I could actually create something to really answer people's questions about the legal stuff and help them understand the legal stuff. And so that was what really got me thinking about it. Again, it was hubris and stupidity on my part because I knew nothing about programming. I guess I knew a little bit about HTML and CSS coding, the basic stuff, but I didn't know anything. And I was like, you know what? We can make this work. Why not? And so I hired developers. It cost me way too much to get it done as I was getting up to speed. Now I'm the head developer because I've learned enough, because that's what I do. I just learn stuff. I'm currently getting a master's in software engineering because having a law degree and I have an MBA, that's not good enough. I've got to get a degree in software engineering too. Why not?
I've literally built everything that we use to run from the website to, everything.
Yep.
And, for me, I'm very self-serving. There are times when, especially even, you've probably attested to this working with developers, they get it, but there's always a little bit of translation there between what you envision versus what gets produced. And you're like, if I could just do it myself.
It's partly that. It's partly, and it's not unique to the developers. People have long said, I move at the speed of Bobby and no one else moves at the speed of Bobby. And so it really has been a frustration for me in so many different ways.
Yeah.
But part of it separately was like the developers I hired, they are fantastic. They are guys who a couple of them work. I don't know if the company does, or I think it's just a couple of the developers also work as contractors for NASA. So that gives you a level of kind of the level of stuff they're doing. But the problem was, looking back on, that should have been a key. Maybe this isn't right, because the problem was they were bringing that sense of, I don't say perfection, but everything had to be tested 8 different times and had to be validated and all those things where, look, we were worrying about potential problems that probably would never come up, but we should solve them in advance. And that's just not the way you build software as a startup, right? As a startup, you build software from hey,
get the MVP up.
And it's not just the MVP. It's hey, this is an edge case that may come up, maybe not. Let's put it out. And if it becomes a problem, we fix it then, right? We deal with that later.
Yep.
And we weren't taking that approach. So we got way behind schedule, way over budget. And
you did say they worked for NASA.
The product they built was great. And what I like to say is, so we had 3 core features that were going to be the initial core features. And again, this is kind of my stupidity. I should have just said, hey, I'm going to create this one, replace the agreements, basically should have been the core. That's what I'm going to do. And then later I'm going to introduce these things. But why just limit that? But we had these 2 other things we're going to introduce. We got 2 of the 3 done with them. It cost 2.5 times as much as all 3 were supposed to cost, and twice or 3 times as long. I developed the last one, but I like to say I couldn't have built that last one without the framework they built, because I didn't have to code up CSS. I didn't have to do a lot of the stuff because that was already done, but it was this other thing of creating a chat functionality. Again, it was this struggle. And part of it is, look, we're in a very different age than we were 3 years ago. 3 years ago, you had to be a very experienced coder to create anything workable code. Now you don't. Now, I don't believe in the notion of people who are out vibe coding and don't know stuff. And when I was working with the coders,
you do have to have a sense of what it's doing. You can't it's not autopilot.
And I was the chief architect of the database. I owned the data even when I was working with the developers. Yeah. And so that was always my thing. So I always understood that. I just wasn't writing the code. And so in a sense, I was in this perfect position. Hey, I can get AI to write the first draft code. I can go in there and fix it and do those things and make things better. But we're in this very weird world now that is so different. And my daughter is 12. And my God, I can't even imagine what she's going to have to understand and learn in her lifetime.
She will never know a world without AI.
Yeah, it was funny. I was driving with my wife earlier. I had to go to the DMV. We don't want to talk about that, but I had to go to the DMV. And it was funny, like after we were leaving the DMV, I pulled out my phone because we had to run somewhere else. I pulled out my phone, pulled up Apple Maps, and then I didn't know the address, but I typed in where I wanted to go. It searched and found it. And it hit me. I said, our daughter will never understand how crazy that is. I grew up in a time you didn't have GPS. You didn't have phones in your car. When I moved to Boston for law school from Texas, I got one of those big old atlases, and mapped out the route. And that was how we had to do it. And I remember.
And then as you're driving, you can't hold the book, right? So I was just telling my wife this recently because we were on a road trip. And I said, I used to count, okay, I get off the exit, I hang a left. I'm going to go 3 streets and then I'm going to, go like you just memorized a pattern of how to get somewhere, but I couldn't remember street by street.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about, and again, like what I was trying to get across to my wife, it wasn't even GPS. I'm saying the fact that I didn't even need to know the address now. I just like type in, I'm looking for Aldi and it goes on fine. I'm like, when you think about these things, but it's like my daughter will never understand that because she grew up in this. And we were out with my mother-in-law last night where I was talking about the fact my mother-in-law was excited because apparently some schools are bringing back cursive. I think that's dumb. I don't know that kids really need to learn cursive, but whatever. But we were talking about typing. Like when I was growing up, we had a typing class. I think it was in middle school where we had typing. And so we had to have typing because you had to learn it at school because you weren't doing it normally. Whereas my daughter has been typing her whole life because devices that she has always had a keyboard. Yeah. And so they don't have typing class anymore. It's just like little things like that.
But I will say, I did learn how to type correctly. Right. I'm not one of the 2-finger kind of typers. I like fully all digits.
Yeah. And that's useful. But I'm saying that's what we had to learn. Whereas I think kids like today, like I just watch her and she has learned it. I don't know how, but intuitively. But yeah. But it is funny because bringing it back, I'm saying like, luckily my daughter, she wants to be a vet as of now. And I hope that sticks around because that's a job category that'll still be around. AI is not taken, that's for sure. But AI is going to eat a lot of the world. And I think that's a reality that we have to face. And it's the first time that a technology revolution is replacing knowledge workers. Before this, every revolution has always favored knowledge workers. And now we're facing this very different world. And I don't have a dystopian view that everything's going to go bad. I just know things are going to be different. And that's why I was like, I got to learn this stuff. I've got to make sure I understand it and stay on kind of the cutting edge of it.
Just a quick aside on that, because I'm not necessarily, as an individual, for me, not necessarily worried about the whole AI threat, primarily because I think if you are a critical thinker, you're going to be okay. I think you have to be inquisitive and you have to seek knowledge, and you have to seek how to synthesize a lot of different things to develop new ideas, new approaches. And so long as you're in that camp, I think you're probably less likely. If you tend to be the kind of knowledge worker who just rests on their current knowledge and gets lulled into the way that things currently operate, I think that could be dangerous for your future.
Yeah, I think that's right. I like to say true thought leaders who are really coming up with something new. Yeah, that AI doesn't do that. Maybe it'll get there sometime, but right now that is not what it does. But I just think about most people, think of an accountant. Most accountants, hopefully they're not creative, right? Accounting is not supposed to be a creative endeavor. It's supposed to be, we do this and we do it accurately. And like, that's just one of the examples I think of. But I knew there were so many people in my world of online business who were building business where like much of it was by creating how-to content that anyone could create. It was very basic, top of funnel stuff, nothing new. That was good enough. And that isn't going to cut it anymore. You're going to have a deep level of knowledge, a deep level of expertise, and in whatever you teach or whatever you happen to deal with. And I agree, that can't be changed. And there's a level of trust. Look, luckily, when it comes to legal stuff, people are like, I want someone. So like the chat feature I built, for example, within my software, I wasn't going to just create something where AI was doing. Yes, there's AI involved, but we have a database of 700 questions with answers that we farmed it and we created stuff, getting questions from our users, et cetera. And I have put my eyes on every single one of those answers. And so we have this big knowledge base that can be used. And we built it so that basically, hey, when you get an answer from the AI, you get a confidence score. Should you be confident in this answer based upon the data in the database? Or is this just coming from generative AI somewhere? In which case you really ought to take it with a grain of salt, because generative AI is good for some stuff, but assuming that it knows things is a big mistake.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned this a couple times, and I want to make sure that we get into a further understanding of this, because you said the legal stuff.
Yeah.
In a very kind of broad way. So when you think about your product and what it does and the legal stuff, if you will, what are some of the things that really are typical of the kind of user experience or the kind of things that you engage with?
Yeah. So I like to tell people we can break legal stuff into a bunch of different categories.
Yeah.
And what I'll tell you is most people, they worry about the wrong stuff. And the most common questions I get asked are things like, should I register a trademark for my name? Should I do that? And I'm like, maybe. But first, why don't we make sure that someone else doesn't have a trademark? And it's almost like they're worried about, should I go protect myself, rather than, I like to say with the legal stuff, your first thing should be make sure you're not doing any harm. Make sure you're not stepping on any landmines that could hurt you by violating something else. Areas you should understand. One, I like to say the most powerful thing you can do in business when it comes to legal stuff is get those agreements in writing. And I learned that the hard way, obviously, as my story taught people, but getting things in writing is your best protection, because lawyers, not like me, I'm nice. I'm a nice, cuddly guy. Most lawyers aren't, but lawyers enjoy the gray area. They enjoy where there is some kind of ambiguity. And that's not where you want to be. Especially when you're early in your business, you probably don't have a lot of money. You don't have a lot of time. The last thing you want to do is spend a bunch of time with lawyers in conference room because they're your lawyers or someone else's lawyers. Just not good. The best way to avoid that, get your agreements in writing. So every relationship you have that matters to your business, there should be a written agreement about it. If money is changing hands, there should be a written agreement in place. So if you're selling something online, like a course, something like that, it can be terms of service that they click to accept, but there should be something in writing that says, here's what the agreement is between you and between me. And this comes back to what I like to say, what I said earlier about our memories aren't as good as we think we are. So a lot of the point of having an agreement in writing isn't because I think the other side is going to be out to screw you. I don't think that's what happens. I think what happens is you think you have an agreement, and 6 months later, neither one of you actually remembers what you agreed to if it's not in writing. And it's not because either one of you is bad. It's because, like I said, we all become heroes to ourselves. The example I like to give people, if you're a copywriter who writes copy for somebody, and 6 months later, your client may say, you have to revise this. You agreed that you were going to give this. And you're like, no, I didn't. Who's right? If you don't have a written agreement, we don't know. And there's no way to go. And what happens then is you end up in this situation where Either nobody backs down, both of you get pissed off, and you're both unhappy, or one of you backs down, feels like you're getting screwed and you're unhappy, and then the other one's happy. So it just doesn't end well. So get those agreements in writing. I like to say there is a lesson in Jerry Maguire, the movie, for just about everything. And this whole, I don't do contracts, but my word is my bond. Don't believe that. That is the dumbest thing ever. And if it's, oh, he's my friend, that's again a recipe for disaster. Oh, it's a family recipe for a disaster. Have a written agreement, period. Now, if it's something you don't care, like you don't care, if they didn't live up to their side, you wouldn't be mad, fine. But if it's something that would affect your business, get it in writing. And there's different levels of good. It's the other thing I tell people when it comes to legal stuff, especially with written agreements. I'll tell you, the best solution will always be an agreement custom drafted for your particular circumstances by a lawyer who understands your business and understands all the legal issues that you have to deal with. That is the best. Problem is that's going to cost you a lot of money most times. So if you can't do that, fine, go a level down. Maybe get templates, maybe use a software solution or something like that. If you're going to tell me you can't even afford that, okay, great. Just write it down in plain English. Now, plain English, there's problems with that. Legalese has a purpose. There's reasons that we lawyers use it. But I'd rather you have an agreement that just the two of you to this agreement wrote out in plain English and agreed to all the important terms in advance. And when you're doing that, make sure you address what happens if the ish hits the fan. Like if things go wrong, that needs to be addressed in the contract. Don't assume everything's going to work out, because it's easy to talk about those things to work out what happens if someone ends up doing something wrong in advance, because no one thinks they're going to break the contract. So deal with that up front, and that'll make your life way better. So that really is the biggest thing I tell people. Other big areas that you ought to understand are IP law. When you're building a business, when you're trying to build content, do those things, you just need to understand a few things, because back when I first started going on podcasts and I was talking about legal stuff, it was funny back then. Maybe it doesn't happen as much anymore, but back then almost every every host would ask me about a Getty Images letter, because either they'd gotten one or they knew someone who had it. And if you're listening to this, you don't know what that is, good. Getty Images is one of these big licensing companies. They own the copyrights to tons of the images that you see all over the internet. Now, if you go around and you see a picture online that you like and you do what I call the right-click save as problem, you're like, oh, that's a nice picture. You just right-click, save as, and put it somewhere, and then use it in your business letter or later. If it happens to be an image that Getty owns the rights to, they will find out. And they're going to send you this nice letter that says, thank you very much for using our image number here. Here's a picture of where you're doing it. We charge $5,000 to license that image. Here's the invoice. Please send us a check. And people would come to me and say, what do I do about that? I said, well, you can negotiate, but you infringe your copyright, so you're going to have to pay them. And so don't do that. Make sure you're getting your images, music, any of that stuff, graphics, any of that stuff you're doing has to be gotten from a source that lets you use it. And you're looking for what's called royalty free. That doesn't mean it's free. You might pay for it, but it just means you're not paying based on usage. Because the last thing you want is to have an image that you have to pay based on usage. And then, God forbid, it goes viral. And then all of a sudden you're like, great. Oh, crap. I got to pay a bunch of money for this. Don't do that. And like I said, I've heard people early on in my career, I saw these people complaining about how YouTube was out to get them and it was clearly political. And then they described it. I was like, this was back in 2017. And I looked at it, I was like, oh, you used music that you didn't have a license to. So they took your channel down. That's what they do.
Even well-established YouTubers, guy that I follow, I've been following him for a while, Rick Beato.
Yep.
He gets letters all the time, and he's providing commentary, he's providing education, and he has someone employed full-time to kind of address these letters as they come.
Right.
And even I, for the stuff that we do, I use a service called Envato. Yep. Has a lot of royalty-free, everything from images to music, and everything that we put through. That is one of the things I made sure of, primarily because I've heard of these instances, but also a little familiarity with that. Just people who I know work in the film or music industry, and it's very important to make sure that you have the right to use stuff, especially if you're a commercial business.
Yep.
Really cannot do the copy-paste kind of stuff. Even for our podcast, like one of the things I ask of guests, I'm like, send me your headshot. And
again, it's one of those things. There's a lot of things that happen in this. And I just like to tell people, I used to hear people say, oh, wasn't there a 7-second rule? What? I was like, 7 seconds is a ban, but I don't know this rule you're talking about. And they said, well, I heard I can play 7 seconds of a song and it's not a problem. I'm like, I don't know where you got that, but that's not the
Yeah,
law.
if that's true, people could use the Intel jingle all they
Right.
wanted to, or
Exactly.
there's these copyrighted sounds that are certainly less than 7 seconds all over the place.
Yeah. And it comes down to basically there's this concept in copyright called fair use. It is an exception that allows you to make fair use of copyrighted material. But what I'll tell you is it's really complicated. It's not a silver bullet. And kind of like you talk about the guy who's got someone whose job is to respond to that. There are lawyers who spend their entire career litigating fair use issues. So assuming that you're going to qualify is a mistake. And one of the factors, is it a commercial venture or not? So if it's a commercial venture, that is a strike against you. So if you were in business and using it in business, it's going to be much harder to win that claim. And so I just tell people don't do it. There's little things like my emails. I've never included a meme. I've never included a GIF in one of my emails because there's all kinds of potential copyright issues with those. And it might be okay. You might be allowed, but I'm like, it's just not worth the headache. It's not worth the risk for me to deal with that. And so I don't do it. And I just tell people, you need to understand the risks involved. And the other thing I would say is when it comes to legal stuff, it's levels of good and not just levels of good, but levels of risk, right? So there are certain things that I always tell people, here's the law, but I also bring but here's the business reality. Example, you should be getting a release from anyone who provides you a testimonial. If you want to use their name, image, or likeness, you need a written release. And you may or may not. Some states will allow non-written waivers of that. Some states require it. And so unless you want to spend a lot of time figuring that out, just best practice, get that. But at the same time, what are the chances that someone gives you a testimonial and then is going to be mad about you using it? Probably pretty small. So don't lose any sleep over that. But again, it's like those kinds of things. I want people to understand the legal stuff and make the decision. So I've told a lot of people about memes and GIFs and they say, you know what? It's fine. I understand that. I'm willing to take the risk. Cool. You know it, you understand it, and you're making an informed decision. It's up to you because the stuff I help people with, look, you're not going to jail for this. This isn't, they're going to come after you. Most of the stuff like the GDPR, that was one of the most hilarious things. There was all this buzz around. I said, I guess there are GDPR police, not really police, but there are people enforcing it. But guess who they're going after? Facebook, Google. They're not coming after us, right? We are not the problem here. So just be good about this and try to do it.
At the end of the day, a lot of small businesses aren't bankrolled and worth millions of dollars. Right. And so it's frivolous to go after a small business that could basically just be like, oh, I don't have the money to cover it, so we'll just close shop.
Yeah, exactly. And I just like to tell people what you want to do is control the controllables, and that's getting written agreements in place, understanding these things. And ultimately, what I think most business people should get to the point of is you don't need to understand most legal issues. What you need to get is to the point that you have man, anytime I mess with my hands, I get that image, but you just want to get to the point of having a tingly spidey sense that, ooh, maybe there's a legal issue here. And then you can go out and try to figure out, is there something here? And again, while I wouldn't say rely upon ChatGPT, you could go ask it if something seems weird, and maybe it'll put you on a line where you can then go do some research and find out, is this an issue? Yes or no. But you just want to get to that point that you start to sense that there's stuff. And I like to joke, a lot of people believe that like law school teaches lawyers law. Maybe a little bit. Really, you graduate law school and all of our exams or most of our exams are what are called issue spotters. The point is so that we spot an issue. Now, we would have to write essays about what the thing was, but I had many teachers that said, look, I really don't care whether you actually get the right answer. I care that you spot all the potential issues. Like if you spot all the potential issues, you're going to get an A, whether you get the right answer, whether, what you come out on the resolution of this issue is right or not. Because in law, that's the issue, is getting to the point you can say, and then say, okay, I got to do some research here and understand and figure out what the particular answer is in these circumstances.
Wow. I mean, so much there. And, the thing, as we get into the legal stuff, there is so, as you mentioned, it can go in so many different directions, whether we're talking about products, whether we're talking about any sort of guarantees that we provide for our products, just the registering, the licensing, all kinds of things. So, Bobby, the app that you have covers all of those things, helps people with guidance around all of that?
So right now, what we have, and again, let me caveat this. I have learned that I really did need to niche down. And part of this is that the legal issues that different types of businesses face are very different. And so I kind of niche down over time. And the people I serve are what I call knowledge brands. They're people who are selling knowledge and expertise. It's packaged in different ways. Sometimes it's coaching, sometimes it's courses, sometimes it's memberships, sometimes it's a digital product. But we've designed this app to really help those people. And right now the app, and it's called Plainly Legal, it's got 3 core features. One, and this one is free because I have this weird belief, going back to this notion of serving, that I don't think people should have to pay me to understand the legal stuff they need to address. And quite honestly, when I've talked to business people about what's the pain point about the legal stuff, the biggest answer we get is, I don't know what I don't know about the legal stuff. So it's like, I don't even know where to start. And so we created this thing, we call it our legal manager, but really it starts with an audit. You answer questions about your business, tell us what kind of products you have, tell us, do you have employees, do you have contractors, goes through all these different questions. And then it generates a legal task list for you. And then good news is people go through it, and for the most part, they say, oh, I've already done this. So a lot of it can look overwhelming when you first do it because it's going to be a big, long list. But one of the things we did, we prioritize it by risk level. Again, because I want you to know all the legal stuff, but I also want you to be able to say, this is low risk. I'm not going to deal with that right now because quite honestly, I don't have time. I don't have the bandwidth. But so it's done in that way to really help you understand legal stuff. There's explanations in there. Some of the stuff is stuff I can't help you with. Quite honestly, there's nothing I can do because some of it is I'm going to tell you how you can market legally. You're going to have to do that. I don't do that. I can tell you the types of claims you're allowed to make, the types of claims you're not allowed to make, but you then have to decide and go out and do some of that work. Then we have our agreement generator, which this kind of replaces our templates, and it's got a broad range of agreements you can generate from website terms, privacy policies, terms of service for courses, for memberships, coaching programs, et cetera. We've got one-on-one agreements. We've got a lot of different stuff in there that you can generate, and we're adding to it. And quite honestly, I'm reworking it and going to make it even better over time where it really allows for even more customization. Right now it's through an interface, you answer questions. And then after you've answered questions, you're going to fill in some blanks in an agreement that you can see. And then the last piece is the chat, which is really meant, I have to caveat this, it's not legal advice. It's providing answers to questions based on a big old database of kind of answers. And we have more to add. I'll go through and add more over time because when we collected questions, there were something like, I think, 2,100 unique questions that we sourced from our users. And I see you say unique means like sometimes as I say, well, these 5 questions are really the same question. I put here's what the actual question, here's the things. But some of them are so unique, I will probably never add answers because they are literally, they are so one-off to this individual weird circumstance. But over time we add more so it gets better and better. But that is meant to help people get an understanding of legal stuff as well to get their answers. So that's what it is now. I've got bigger visions. My long-term goal for it is to create software that for small businesses can serve the role of an in-house counsel's office. So I used to work with these companies. They would have entire teams of lawyers in-house who they basically did everything. They were the ones who handled all the contracts, dealt with a lot of IP issues. And over time, that's my goal, is to build this. We're not there, but that really is my vision for this, to really create a one-stop shop for businesses to get the legal protection in place.
That's really awesome because I think about, there's a trend that's been going on for a couple of years now, fractional CFOs. Yep. And I can see this kind of being the fractional legal go-to. It's a tool that will give you a lot of good foundational information. It's not necessarily counsel, yep, but it will maybe point you to say, you're probably getting to a point where you need to go talk to someone now.
Yep. And I like to say, I told people this with my templates. They would always say, I had a lot of people who said the best part of my templates, the same thing with the agreements they could generate from the app. Basically, they have a counsel, but rather than have a lawyer draft it from scratch, they generate the agreement and then they take it to the lawyer and say, here's my working agreement. What would you change? And how would you tweak this for our particular circumstance to make it better? And that way, hey, they're not writing it from scratch. You're going to save a lot of money. They'll spend maybe an hour or two versus 5 hours or 10 hours or whatever it is. So there are solutions. But yeah, look, what I'll tell people, every business, like I say, if you can afford to have your own lawyer on retainer doing these things, great. You will be much better off. You will. And I'm not going to lie to people about that because as good as the software is, it's obviously built on patterns, not your particular circumstance. I can't possibly deal with every particular circumstance. I've always told people it's the 80-20 rule. I'm trying to get the 80%.
Yeah.
There will be some edge cases that it just doesn't make sense for us to deal with because they're so rare that it's not something that software ever, I don't want to say ever. Maybe as AI gets better and maybe I can really train something up, but we're not there yet. And I'm not going to tell you we're there yet because I think that's important. And like I said, on the chat feature, we really built it because my view was, hey, we have a system, it'll give you an answer, but it's going to make very clear to you if this answer, hey, we're not claiming any credit for this, take it with a grain of salt, because I think you understanding and knowing how valuable or how much you can read into this is important. And we went even further. So if you ask a question in my chat feature, the way it's built is through complicated stuff that I've tweaked, tested, et cetera, it pulls the 5 closest questions in our database and sends that off to be synthesized and to be taken. And there's a lot of guidance, a lot of guardrails. But you don't just get the answer, you will also get links to all of the questions that were sent. You can click on those links and then it opens the answer that I wrote. So you're able to see my answer to a similar question and be able to say, oh, you know what, that actually is exactly what I'm asking. Okay, I can read it. Okay, good. I've got this. I've got the answer that it's Bobby approved. And so you know that because I believe giving credibility and expertise is valuable to people and helping people get that knowledge.
And at the end of the day, I use this saying a lot. Sometimes we need a compass, not a GPS. We need to be pointed in the right direction. And when we need a better tool, something that is more accurate, then we can look for that. Yep. But man, the number of people who can benefit from just knowing whether they're on a path that's going to lead them in a bad place, that's good to know.
Yep.
But it's funny because I always joke. I have a daughter who's in the entertainment industry. She's an actor, and I am not a legal expert, but I am a business person who's read a lot of contracts and talked to a lot of lawyers about contracts. And so I usually give them a once over. And man, sometimes I come across them and I'm like, did they just copy this off the internet and put in their information? I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. What are they trying to say?
So I got to tell you a story about that because this was one of my highlights of this kind of world. So when GDPR was happening, because I was doing those trainings, because I was doing this back in 2018, people were reaching out to me to see if I could help them deal with certain things. And so someone reached out to me to work on a privacy policy for their website. And I said, okay, would you like me also to create a terms of service? I said, sure. And so I looked on their website. This was a North American home builder who reached out to me. Again, I don't even know how they found me. They connected me through someone. But so I'm reading, they had an existing terms of service. So I said, do you want me to read that and see if they're, so I'm reading it and it's talking about Swedish law applying and it's talking about downloads. And I'm like, or streaming. I'm like, what in the world? And then I figured out
Spotify's terms of
someone
service.
had copied Spotify's terms of service and put it on a home builder's website. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but that was still one of the funniest experiences I've had. I was like, wow.
That is great. I actually had somebody want to partner with me one time to do online courses, online training. And he hands me a contract and I'm looking at it and it had things in there like, in essence, I own anything you create for the next 10 years. And I'm like, no, I'm good. Needless to say, I never signed the contract and gave them all. I redlined a whole bunch of stuff and said, help me understand this and explain this. Yeah. And then we just didn't move forward.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we built into the software too. One of the things we could make better about it. So with my templates, I had these videos explaining, and I would explain what the clauses meant and all that. People wouldn't listen to that because they just wanted to know how to fill it in. Whereas in the software, literally these clauses. Now, some of them we don't have explanation of. This is the introduction. We're not going to explain much, but anything that has some essence, you can click on it and there's a plain English explanation. Here's what this is saying. Here's what it means. And so you can understand it because I don't know, I'm weird. I feel like business people and entrepreneurs ought to be able to understand this stuff, but I'll be clear. We still use legalese and there's a reason why. I tell people I hate it more than you. Trust me, I've read a lot more legalese than you have, but it's there because what's happened is this endless kind of circle between contract writers start simple then someone finds a loophole, sues them and wins. So we add a clause to close that loophole. Somebody finds another loophole. We add a clause to close that. And it gets big because we're closing loopholes.
Yeah.
But,
and these words mean very specific things.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And there, sometimes you don't need specific words, but there are some places where you really, with transferring IP, you need some very specific language there. And there's just certain things you want to have in there so that you know that it's right and it's been done right.
Bobby, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk and walk through all this stuff. I know we've gone over time, but I'll be honest, this is just one of those topics that I love getting into, love talking about, I love hearing about, especially when I got somebody who's really sharp about this stuff. You got such a really cool background.
Yeah. I appreciate it, Ben. I apologize for going over. I tell people good luck.
No, I'm good if you're good.
Gave a former trial lawyer a mic and said, go. And guess what? I'm going to talk a lot.
No, that's awesome. Like I said, I'm good if you're good. Yeah. So I just, I don't want to keep you from any family duties or anything that you have lined up for the rest of the day. So Bobby, how I always like to give people the opportunity. Give me the rundown on how do people find you? How do they get a hold of what you're working on? And if they even, do legal stuff still, how do they get in touch with you?
So again, I don't actually do any custom legal work for anybody anymore. I work with that one guy on some stuff, but you can, if you're looking for a legal solution, just check out plainlylegal.com. I always tell people, especially if you're in that niche. Now, if you're a different niche, it's probably not going to be that useful to you. But if you're someone who's kind of selling knowledge products of some sort, and you go to the website, there's buttons everywhere that'll say start for free. So you click one of those and you can do that audit. You can get your legal task list free. So that's where I tell people to start. Just do that. And then you can decide whether you want to go with a paid plan to get access to the other stuff. If you do, great. If you don't, hey, great. At least I helped you maybe understand the legal stuff you need. As for the other stuff, Bobby Klinck everywhere. You can find me. And I say everywhere. I'm an old guy, so I'm not on the TikToks, but you can find me on Facebook if you want to. You can find me on Instagram, although I don't really post much. You can find me on LinkedIn and connect with me. I'm always open to chat with people, and feel free to reach out if there's something that you have a question about or just want to connect with me.
Well, I love that because I've got some people on my board who are in the speaker coaching world. Yep. And definitely know quite a few people in those circles. So great that this is a resource that people can lean into. I'll definitely make some recommendations to some folks that I know. It makes a lot of sense because so many things to cover there. It's funny. As I was putting my book together, because I'm putting it out myself, I don't currently have a publisher or anything, but I was at a seminar recently. So I went to Podfest in Orlando, and I was attending one of the talks, and I was looking through a book that somebody had handed out, and I saw, right there in the front of the book, disclaimer, and I was like, oh, I haven't done a disclaimer. And I was reading through it. And then, of course, I did a little research and I was like, yeah, I better put a disclaimer in my book.
Yep.
Like I said, you just never know when you come across something and you need a little bit of a review and some advice.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I like to say we lawyers, we've screwed everything up. Like, I still watch TV, and some of the TV I watch still has commercials on it. And I always laugh when you watch a commercial for a pharmaceutical product. And one of the disclaimers is, don't use this product if you're allergic to this product. I'm like, do we really need to say that? Do we really need to say that? Apparently we do, because some lawyer sued when they didn't. But I'm like, oh, we lawyers, we mess everything up. But
after they go through all the ways you could possibly die, I say this all the time. I'm like, but aside from that, yeah.
And again, like all that stuff, but like maybe I just never noticed it before, but I just started noticing in the last 5 years, don't take this product if you're allergic. And they're not saying don't take Allegra if you're allergic to Allegra. Duh. I mean, duh.
It's only one way to find out,
I guess.
By the way, I'm not endorsing anybody to take Allegra.
I'm not saying that. I'm amused by those things.
Oh man. Well, Bobby, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you dropping in, saying hello. Everybody else, thank you guys for checking out DissedMedia, a startup story. Like I always say, tell your friends. Our goal is 100,000 subs by the end of 2026 on YouTube. Even though Bobby's not on TikTok, he's going to be, thanks to the clips I'm going to run of this episode on TikTok. Find us, connect with us, follow us, all of that wonderful stuff. Share with a friend, share with an enemy. We don't care as long as you share it. Thank you guys for dropping in. Appreciate your time, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening to DissedMedia, A Startup Story. This podcast was produced and edited by Ben Olmos and is a production of DissedMedia Corporation. If you're interested in learning more about anything you heard on this episode, please reach out to us at podcast@dissedmedia.com. You can also get more information about this and other episodes or information about our guests by checking out dailypitch.news, our business and insights publication focused on helping managers, leaders, and entrepreneurs get better at what they do.